He waited for her to finish speaking before he raised his hand. Not to interrupt, just enough to be seen. The room was already loud. City officials shifting in their seats, developers whispering, assistants lining the walls with tablets and phones. Cameras sat on tripods near the back, red lights glowing. This meeting wasn't private. It never was. My concern, Marcus said evenly, is that the zoning overlay on this parcel conflicts with the environmental buffer approved last quarter. He didn't raise his voice or accuse anyone. He stated a fact. Claire didn't look at the map. She didn't ask for clarification. She smiled. "Oh, come on," she said, waving a hand. "If we let planners overthink every map, we'd never build anything in this city." A few people laughed. Someone near the front repeated the joke under their breath. Another shook their head, amused. The chair didn't intervene. The cameras kept rolling. Marcus opened his mouth, then stopped. For a moment it looked like he might respond, like he might explain, like he might defend himself. Instead, he closed his folder. He leaned back in his chair and said nothing. The laughter faded, but no one apologized. Claire moved on to the next slide, already talking about timelines and visibility and momentum. The meeting flowed forward as if nothing had happened. Marcus stayed silent for the rest of it. To everyone in that room, it looked like he'd been put in his place. Another technical voice brushed aside. Another detail dismissed for the sake of speed. What no one noticed was the timestamp he wrote down before the slide changed. And what no one in that room understood yet was that the project they were celebrating had just stopped being hers. This was her room. You could tell by the way people waited for her to speak before they spoke themselves. City officials leaned forward when she nodded. Developers relaxed when she smiled. Consultants adjusted their slides based on her reactions, not the agenda. Claire didn't need to raise her voice. She never did. She sat at the center of the table. The posture of someone who had done this 100 times and expected to do it 100 more. When she talked about the project, she used words like progress, revitalization, jobs. The kind of words that sound good no matter who's listening. Around her, the room followed along. Marcus sat a few seats away, closer to the end. No nameplate, no microphone pulled close. To most people there, he wasn't leadership. He was support. The person you call after decisions are already made, just to make sure the paperwork lines up. The technical guy. That's how rooms like this work. Some voices are seen as vision. Others are seen as details. And details are easy to brush aside when the room wants momentum. Claire clicked through slides confidently. Renderings of future buildings filled the screen. Applause came early before questions. She joked with one of the developers. Someone mentioned a press release. Another brought up a ribbon-cutting date. Everything felt settled. No one asked Marcus anything. No one checked back on the concern he raised earlier. Not because it had been answered, but because the room had already decided it didn't matter. That's what authority looks like when it's comfortable. It doesn't argue. It moves on. And Marcus understood that better than anyone there. He didn't interrupt again. He didn't try to win the room back. Because from where he was sitting, the room wasn't deciding the future. It was just confirming an assumption. And assumptions, Marcus knew, don't survive contact with paperwork. Marcus hadn't come to the meeting to debate anyone. He didn't come with a speech. He didn't come with slides. He came with a folder that already felt familiar in his hands. Inside it were permits he'd read more than once. Easements that crossed property lines in ways most people never notice. Environmental conditions approved months earlier, buried in attachments no one talked about once the vote was over. He had gone through all of it the night before. Slowly. Line by line. The same way he always did. Not because he enjoyed it, but because that's how mistakes show themselves. People like Claire were trained to look ahead, timelines, headlines, deadlines. Marcus was trained to look underneath. To notice where things didn't quite line up. Where something approved in principle quietly conflicted with something approved in writing. That zoning overlay on the screen wasn't new to him. Neither was the buffer zone it crossed. He'd worked on similar projects before. He'd seen how small conflicts became expensive ones when no one wanted to pause early enough. That's why he raised his hand. Not to challenge her authority. Not to embarrass her. Just to mark the moment where the project stopped matching the paperwork. When she laughed it off, Marcus didn't feel angry. He felt certain. Certain that she hadn't read the same pages he had. Certain that no one in that room had asked the right follow-up questions yet. Certain that the confidence filling the room was running a few steps ahead of the facts. He looked down at his notebook, wrote one sentence, added the time, and closed it. Marcus wasn't there to convince anyone. He didn't need agreement. He didn't need the room on his side. He just needed to confirm what he already suspected. Before the next slide appeared, the decision was already made. The meeting moved on, but the details didn't disappear. A few slides later, when the discussion turned to timelines, Marcus leaned forward again. Not abruptly, just enough to be seen. "There's one more thing," he said calmly. "The construction schedule overlaps with the floodplain review. That usually requires—" Claire didn't let him finish. "We'll handle that internally," she said, already looking back at the screen. "Let's not slow this down." Her tone wasn't sharp. It didn't need to be. It carried the kind of confidence that signals a conversation is over before it starts. A city aide near the wall shifted their weight. They glanced at the screen, then at Marcus, then back at Claire. Their pen paused above a notepad, unsure whether to keep writing. No one else spoke. Marcus looked around the table once, not searching for support, just noticing who avoided his eyes. Then he nodded. In acknowledgement, he leaned back again, folded his hands, let the conversation move past him without resistance. From the outside, it looked like he'd backed down, like he understood his place and accepted it, like the room had spoken and the matter was settled. Claire kept talking. The project kept moving forward. People relaxed again. Jokes returned. Someone mentioned lunch. Marcus didn't raise his hand a third time. He didn't need to, because at that point he wasn't trying to be heard anymore. He was just letting the record reflect exactly how the decision was made. Marcus waited until the conversation had moved far enough away from him. People were talking about budgets now, about traffic flow, about how quickly the announcement could be made once the vote passed. The room had relaxed again, confident that the hard parts were behind them. That's when he opened his notebook. It wasn't anything special. No logo, no tabs, just a worn book he carried to every meeting, the kind that fits easily in a bag and never draws attention. He didn't write much. One sentence. Plain. Direct. No emotion attached to it. He wrote down what he raised. He wrote down how it was dismissed. He wrote down who was present. Then he added the time. Not because he planned to use it right away, but because moments like this have a way of coming back later, when memory starts to blur and people remember things differently than they happened. He closed the notebook and slid it back into his bag. No one noticed. To everyone else, it looked like nothing. Just another planner taking notes. Another meeting inching toward its end. But Marcus wasn't recording ideas. He was recording a decision. And once it was written down, he didn't need to say another word. Claire wrapped things up the way she always did. She summarized the timeline, highlighted the wins, and thanked everyone for their flexibility. She talked about press coverage, about moving fast, about how important it was to keep the momentum going. Heads nodded around the table. Someone started clapping before she finished her last sentence. Others joined in. The sound filled the room, easy and automatic, the kind of applause that comes from relief more than excitement. Marcus stood before it reached him. He gathered his bag quietly, slid the chair back without drawing attention. No one stopped him. No one asked where he was going. As he reached the door, Claire was already speaking to someone near the front, smiling, energized by the room. Marcus turned back just enough to be heard. "You'll need to pause this," he said. A few people glanced over, confused. Claire barely looked up. "We'll be in touch," she replied, distracted. Marcus nodded once, opened the door, and stepped out into the hallway. Behind him, the applause finished. Conversations picked back up. The room moved on, certain the project was settled. But the moment Marcus left the building, the clock started running. And by the time the city lights came on that night, The project was already heading somewhere very different than anyone in that room expected. The video didn't explode online. It didn't show up on news feeds or trend anywhere. There were no captions arguing about what happened. No comments section filled with opinions. It moved differently. Someone in the room clipped a short segment from the meeting. Just a few seconds. The moment Marcus spoke. The interruption. The joke. The laugh that followed. They sent it to one person. That person sent it to another. Not with outrage. Just a simple message. Have you seen this? By late afternoon, it had reached people who didn't care about jokes or impressions. Planners who looked at meetings for what they revealed, not how they sounded. Legal teams who listened for what was ignored. Regulators who paid attention to tone as much as process. The clip raised quiet questions. Why was a compliance concern dismissed so quickly? Why was there no follow-up? Why did the chair allow it to move on? No one tagged Marcus. No one defended him publicly. His name wasn't attached to the clip at all. But the footage kept moving. From inbox to inbox. From office to office. And everywhere it landed, it slowed things down just enough for people to look closer. By the time the workday ended, the project hadn't been stopped. But it had been noticed. And once something like that is noticed, it doesn't go back to being invisible. The next morning, the project didn't stall all at once. It slowed. An email went out asking for clarification on a zoning detail. Then another, this one from the city's legal team, pointing out language that didn't match what had been approved months earlier. Someone flagged the environmental review and asked why it hadn't been updated to reflect the latest boundaries. Nothing accusatory. Nothing dramatic. Just questions. The kind of questions that don't stop a project outright, but make it harder to move forward without explaining a few things first. By mid-morning, the environmental review was marked as pending. Not denied. Just paused. Long enough to take another look. Claire was told about it between meetings. At this point, someone said carefully, we need Marcus Hale to walk us through the original approvals. She frowned. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She scrolled through her notes, then through her contacts, as if his name might appear somewhere else first. He's just a planner, she said. We can handle it. There was a pause on the other end of the line. He's the planner who signed off on the zoning framework, the voice replied. And the one who raised the concern yesterday. The room around Claire felt quieter after that. The project wasn't in trouble yet. No headlines. No statements. No pressure from outside. But for the first time since the meeting, the conversation wasn't about timelines or momentum. It was about whether the project could move forward at all without the person whose warning had been brushed aside. And that was a new position for Claire to be in. It didn't take long for people to start looking him up. Out of necessity, the legal team pulled his name from old documents. The planning department checked earlier approvals. Someone in compliance traced the framework back to its source. Marcus Hale wasn't just assigned to the project. He helped design the rules it was built on. Years earlier, he'd been part of the team that drafted the zoning framework the city now relied on. The same framework Claire referenced in meetings without ever needing to explain it. The same one that made projects move faster when followed correctly. He'd also consulted on federal infrastructure plans. Not as a spokesperson. Not as a public face. As someone brought in to make sure things held up under review. That's why his sign-off mattered. It wasn't ceremonial. It wasn't a box to check at the end. His approval connected permits, environmental reviews, and funding conditions together. Remove that connection and the project didn't collapse, it stalled. Quietly. Completely. When this came up, there was no announcement. No urgent call. Just a shift in tone. Suddenly, people were asking what Marcus thought. Whether he had concerns. Whether he'd be available to clarify a few things. Claire heard his name again that afternoon. This time, no one joked. Because the room had finally realized something it should have known all along. Marcus wasn't there to support the project. The project was standing on work he had already done. Claire called him just after lunch. Her message was polite, professional, the kind of voicemail people leave when they assume the conversation will be easy. Hi Marcus, it's Claire. I wanted to follow up on yesterday's meeting and see if you had a few minutes to talk. Nothing urgent. Just want to make sure we're aligned. She hung up and went back to her schedule. An hour passed. The second message sounded different. Marcus, it's me again. We've had a couple of questions come up from legal, and your input would really help move things along. When you get a chance, please call me back. By late afternoon, the third call came. This time, she didn't mention alignment. Marcus, we need to connect today, she said. There's been a pause on the environmental review, and we can't proceed without clarification. Her voice was still controlled, but it was faster now, less certain. Marcus saw the missed calls when his workday ended. He listened to the messages once. Then he set the phone down. He didn't block the number. He didn't decline the call. He just didn't return it. Not out of spite. Not to prove a point. He had already spoken when it mattered. Now, the silence was doing exactly what his words couldn't the day before. This time, Claire was the one waiting. The meeting didn't happen in the main conference room. It was a small office down the hall, the kind usually used for quick check-ins. No microphones, no cameras, just a table, 2 chairs, and the quiet hum of the building winding down for the evening. Claire arrived first. When Marcus walked in, she stood up quickly, offered a smile that stayed in place a second too long, and gestured toward the chair across from her. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know it's been a long day." Marcus nodded and sat down. She started talking right away, about miscommunication, about how meetings move fast, about how sometimes things come out wrong when there's pressure to keep projects on track. Marcus didn't interrupt. He didn't correct her. He didn't bring up the joke. He didn't mention the meeting at all. He only listened. When she paused, expecting a response, he reached into his bag and took out a folder. He placed it on the table between them. "I wanted to walk you through something," he said calmly. Claire looked at the folder, then back at him. The room felt smaller then, not tense, just focused. Marcus opened the folder and turned the first page. And for the first time since the meeting, the conversation stopped being about tone and intent. It became about what was written down. Marcus didn't rush. He pointed to the first page in the folder and explained what the zoning overlay conflicted with. Not in legal language, in plain terms, where one approval stopped and another one crossed it. Then he turned the page. "This part," he said, "triggers a compliance review if it's ignored after being raised in a public meeting." Claire leaned in slightly. He didn't look at her when he said it. He didn't need to. The moment it was dismissed on record, Marcus continued, it stopped being a planning issue. It became an oversight issue. He paused, letting that settle. "The review doesn't accuse anyone," he said. "It just removes control until everything lines up again." Claire flipped through the pages herself now, faster than before. Her expression changed in recognition. "So what happens next?" she asked. Marcus met her eyes. "The project gets reassigned," he said. "Temporarily. Oversight steps in. Decisions pause until the framework is reviewed." She sat back. "And my role?" Marcus didn't soften his voice, but he didn't harden it either. "You won't be leading it," he said. "Not during the review." The room stayed quiet. Claire stared at the folder for a long moment, then closed it slowly, like someone realizing there was no argument left to make. This wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't personal. It was already done. Outside the office, the building lights dimmed as staff headed home. Inside, Claire sat still, understanding that the project she had spoken about with such certainty that morning no longer belonged to her. And Marcus gathered his folder, the same way he always did, when the work was finished. The city released a short statement that evening. Just a notice that the project would move forward under temporary oversight while certain reviews were completed. A new name appeared as acting lead. Claire's didn't. By the time most people saw the update, it was already dark outside. The meeting from earlier that day felt distant, like something that had happened in a different week. The next morning, Marcus went back to work. Same desk, same routine. Coffee first, emails after. No one stopped him in the hallway. No one congratulated him. That wasn't how it worked. Across the city, the project moved on without the person who had spoken the loudest about it. There was no public apology, no statement from Marcus, no moment where he explained what happened. He didn't need to. The paperwork said enough. And if you've ever been talked over, brushed aside, or made to feel small for raising a real concern, you already know this part. Silence doesn't mean nothing happened. Sometimes it means the work did. Comment one word that stood out to you. Respect, accountability, justice, leverage. Share this with someone who's been talked over but never unprepared. And subscribe for more stories.